And so let's get practical in our own state and look for just a moment here. I'm probably risking some things when I start talking about this particular topic. Before I even say anything else, this is Kim Davis. She is formerly a judge, or a clerk in a county in the state of Kentucky. If you've had your eyes open to a news station or to a social networking site, you know who she is. You know a little bit about what she's gone through in the past few weeks. Before I state something, I just want you to know that you're not going to find me on one end of the pendulum. I'm not going to be way over here going, nah, 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 and I'm not going to be way over here doing that either, but there is some truth and some wisdom that we might seek that's somewhere in the middle of these extremes, okay? Second thing you should need to know is that I'm not here to judge Miss Kim Davis. I don't know Miss Kim Davis. I've never been in the same room with her, and although we're using her story because it's a national issue, this is not about her as an individual. I don't know her and have no right to make a statement as to her rightness or wrongness. We clear on that one? Okay. Let me give you a little history here. This is just a little history, just in case you're unfamiliar. SCOTUS, that means, by the way, Supreme Court of the United States. SCOTUS, in the Obergefell versus Hodges in June of 2015, that's this past summer, they made an agreement. By the way, it was a 5-4 vote. If you're not familiar with that, that means that out of 9 justices, 5 of them voted for Obergefell, 4 of them for Hodges. So in the long run, even at the highest levels, our country is divided on this topic. Okay? Very, very divided. The outcome of that SCOTUS decision was that all states must issue marriage licenses to eligible same-sex couples. By the word eligible, I mean they're not already married to somebody else. You know, something like that. Okay, so that's what eligible means. That was the decision, June of 2015. Kim Davis, along with many others, by the way, she's not the only one, but she is a person whose job requires her to issue those licenses, and she makes a formal appeal to the folks who are her bosses above her. She makes a formal appeal, and legally she does the right path, and at that point she's issuing anyone marriage licenses. She stops issuing them to anyone. Now, before I go any further, can I give you a little history on marriage license, okay? How many of you have ever been around after a wedding and the pastor's prayed and the couple is kissed and they've cut the cake and they you know, if it was a Methodist wedding, they danced, you know, had DJ and stuff. If it's a Baptist wedding, they just ate more cake. And, you know, like that's, okay, at the end, and then somebody says this quote. It happens at every wedding. They say, we have to make this official. You ever heard that? Anybody ever heard something like that? We're going to make sure to make this official. Going to make this official. Okay, what that means is that there's a document that couple was supposed to have gotten within the last 30 days at the local courthouse where now they sit down. And by the way, they don't sign it. They've already signed it. They signed it when they were at the courthouse. The 3 people who have to sign it is the pastor or judge or whoever in the state of Kentucky. Now, you don't have to be anything to sign a marriage license. As long as the couple believes you have the right to marry them, then you do. Okay, I mean, literally, you could fill out the marriage license that my name is Yogi Berra, the former, I mean, like it's really surprising how little has to be done. 20 years ago, when I became a pastor 22 years ago, you had to be bonded. It cost me $500 to be able to go to the courthouse and leave a $500 bond for me to be able to do a wedding. Okay? So that I got a church member to pay it. That's a wise choice right there. I'm like, hey, I'm 20. Come on, help me out here. So now it's just pretty much anybody can do it. There was even a joke when I was younger. People would go online and get ordained. You don't even have to do that anymore. You don't have to because like anybody can do it, okay? Here's what happens. The pastor or whoever officiant signs it twice and says the date and things, and then 2 witnesses do it. The witness's purpose is so that if the government loses the document, they'll swear in that it was there. That's their only life. So I tell people when you get married, choose somebody younger than you, because when you're real old and about to die and the government says, I don't think you've ever been married, then somebody hopefully younger than you will come along and say, yeah, I was there, I signed it, I've got the receipt, okay? Did you know that prior to the 1920s, almost nobody in America had a license to get married? Your great-grandparents did not have a marriage license. They did not. Quite frankly, I'm going to be blunt. You know why we started doing marriage licenses? because white people started marrying black people, and it made people upset. And so they started making it illegal to marry interracially, and government started having in the 1920s the marriage license so that they could formally tell somebody you can't marry that person. That's the only reason it developed. After that, it was realized that we can, wait a second, if we have all of this documented, then we'll know how to tax people and we'll know how to deal those things. So the marriage license develops as an American governmental political document. When I was ordained, it's another document. When I was ordained, here's what happened. A couple of deacons from my church went down to the Christian bookstore and bought a certificate. It was pretty and nice and had calligraphy and stuff. Then my church that I went to brought me down front. They prayed over me. They invited the whole crowd to lay hands on me and pray for me. And they prayed for me and prayed for me and prayed for me. And then they set that document off to the side on a music stand. And they put a really fancy, cool pen with the little quill thing at the bottom on it. And then one by one, every one of the men who prayed for me signed it. And when they were done, they gave it to me. And I took it home and I put it in a frame and I hung it on the wall. And it's the only place in the world that that document exists. It's not filed with the government. It's not filed with the denomination. It's not filed with any. Once I had to send a copy of it to my insurance company to prove to them that I was ordained. That's it. It might show up if I were ever sought after by the IRS. They might ask me if I have proof of my ordination. That's it. I'm telling you that prior to 1927, that is the way people were married. How did they know they were married? Their priest or their pastor told them that they were married. Their church told them that they were married. That's the history. It's not until the 20s that it becomes formal. Everybody everywhere has to do it. Okay? So, I kind of laugh when somebody goes, got to make it official. Because I'm thinking, God's already made it official. This is just something else. Okay? Now, I'll tell you a funny story. Twice in my ministry, I've been asked not to sign a marriage license. A couple wanted to get married, but they did not want to turn it into the government. That's happened twice. Both times I chose not to do the wedding, and it had nothing to do with whether or not I would sign a document. It had to do with their reasoning for why they didn't want me to sign the document. I don't remember the second one, but the first one was the lady was getting a pretty nice alimony check. And if she got married to another guy, that check would stop. And so she wanted to be, in other words, she wanted to be able to have sex with this guy without feeling guilty, but she also wanted that guy to keep sending her money. And so I said, I'm sorry, I can't be a part of that. That feels like fraud, and I don't want to do that. So I stayed out of it, okay? So we're going to move on, okay? But in the history here is that Kim Davis files an appeal, and she stopped issuing any more marriage licenses to anybody. The third thing is that the federal district judge, David Bunning, doing his job, made a ruling. Along with him, the U.S. District Court agreed, and she was told to issue license. Like she made the appeal, and it didn't work. And at that point, in my opinion, this is when the ethics get hard. Okay, my opinion is that she did everything right up until that moment. She said, I'm not going to issue them to anybody until my bosses tell me for sure what I'm supposed to do, because I really don't want to do this. Okay? Then the federal judge and the U.S. District Court demand that she issue licenses to everyone who's eligible, and she refuses. Shortly thereafter, on the 3rd of this month, she is jailed for a charge of contempt of court by personal surrender to the U.S. Marshals. In other words, she found out she was in contempt of court, she found out there was a warrant for her arrest, and so she went to the U.S. Marshal office and volunteered her surrender. She went and did that. That is the history of what has happened. So we have a few questions, and I know I'm going a little bit longer today than normal, and I apologize for that, but I think this is important for us to know. I'm not too far from done. How are Christians who hold public office to fulfill their role when those in a higher office legislate contrary to Christian conviction? That is the question. That is the question. How are those who are in elected office who have Christian conviction supposed to do their job when above them is legislated things that are opposed to or different than their Christian conviction? And I would add to that there are lots of Christian convictions, some of them that we're all in agreement on and some of them that we're not. This is one that has the majority of biblical-based Christians in America are on the same side to this conviction, but this could be about some other topic that would maybe have her in a more minority group that does. This particular one's a pretty big one. Okay, another truth that we know to be true from Scripture without a doubt that follows us into this argument is that the Christian, you or me, any Christian, cannot act in violation of conscience without committing sin. In other words, there is no way for me to do something God told me not to do and it not be sin. It is. If I do something God told me not to do, then it's sin. That's the depth of Christian conviction. We're not talking about something like, I kind of like that music, but they want to sing this other music. That's soft and simple. I'm saying, I believe this is a sin, I cannot do it, and now I'm being told that I have to do it. Okay? So, and if I do it, I know it's a sin. That's a reality for us as Christians. Even though I read some really compelling passages earlier about obeying authority over you, we also see in Acts chapter 5, Peter saying to the men who were telling him what he had to do and he wouldn't do it, he says, we must obey God rather than men. We must obey God rather than men. And all of a sudden, there are some things that develop. I'll bring this up too. One phrase I'm hearing a lot lately is war on Christianity. Have you heard this? Have you heard this one? There's a war on Christianity. I don't mean this disrespectfully, but can I just say this? There has always been a war on Christianity. This is not a new thing. Now, let me tell you about America's past. The war on Christianity in America's past had a different game plan. And that was, if we can make you out, and this isn't, I'm not talking about America doing this, I'm talking about Satan doing this, okay? The enemy has always had a war on Christianity. In the past it was, if I can make you look like a Christian and kind of think like a Christian and outwardly behave a little bit like a Christian, and if I can get you connected to a church to where they recognize you, and if I can make you culturally somewhat Christian, but in the process, if I can keep you from being Christian, then in the long run, I can send you straight to hell. That's the war. That's the war on Christianity I grew up around. That's the war on Christianity you guys have grown up around and seen. We all know people who at the end of their life claim Christianity and yet have spent their entire lives not honoring Jesus at all. They were succumbed to the war on the mission that Jesus has. It just so happens that the tactics have changed recently. We've gone from this comfortable place where it's easy to not quite be a Christian as long as you fake it really well. We've gone from that place to a place in our future that will be harder to genuinely be faithful, and we will see many, many, many Christians bow out fast as soon as it becomes hard for them to be a Christian. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it that we will see many people step away quickly as soon as martyrdom becomes a potential. And I don't even mean death martyrdom. I mean you're not going to get this raise at your work, or you're not going to get this job promotion, or you're not going to get to do the fun things that you want. There will be many people that will bow out fast because they've been under the battle of one war, which was let's go easy and simple and peaceful and let fake be fine, to a place where fake is no longer fine and only real moves forward. There is a war on Christianity. There's always been. It's not a new thing. So let's give a history to that a little bit. I hope this is helpful to you guys. At the Protestant Reformation, which is the beginning of all Christian churches like ours that kind of broke off from the Roman Catholic Church many years ago, Martin Luther and John Calvin, two of my theological heroes, two of the guys who came up with and developed theology that many of us believe and hold true to, they affirmed what they called the tyrannical dictates of a higher authority, okay? In other words, they said that when you have to defy someone, let me just read it. John Calvin affirmed the tyrannical dictates of a higher authority could be defied by a lesser government authority who acted on conscience in defense of what is right. In other words, there are going to be times when you will have to disagree with those above you, and you'll have to do something about it. This actually led to the Anabaptist argument, which, by the way, is a big part of our Baptist history. The Anabaptists, they actually argued that it's unchristian to work for the government. That was their argument, not mine. I'm just saying, they actually argued that no Christian could faithfully hold government office. This is 150 years ago. This is not a recent reality, but all of the Anabaptists of our past said that that's what they should do. In the long run, you and I are going to have to know how to handle situations when we find ourselves given an opportunity to do something that we know is sin. My good friend James Armstrong that you hear me talk about, well, he is the lead chaplain at one of the largest Air Force bases in the world. He was at my house this week. I sat down with him and I talked to him and I said, how's this work in the military? I know there are times when you as a chaplain have been asked to do something that you're uncomfortable with doing. How's that work? And he said, yes. He said, it's called resigning in protest. I said, what do you mean? He said, there's an actual form in the military you fill out. If you're given a direct order and you cannot follow that order because of your conscience, then you resign in protest. And I said, what does that mean? And he said, well, you don't disobey the order because we hold high the authority above us. And at the same time, you can't fulfill the order because it breaks your own conscience. And so the honorable choice for a military godly man is to resign in protest. I said, what does that look like? And he said, if I resigned in protest, what would happen is that most likely I would no longer be eligible for advancement, and they would move me to a new post where I would not be asked to do the thing that I was asked to do. And I would give up my future promotions. My friend James is a lieutenant colonel. He would very much love to be a colonel. He said, if I were to resign in protest over this issue, it would probably mean I'll never be colonel. And yet I do still have a job, and it's working for a different person who will not ask me to do what the other person asked me to do. That's what I would do. He said, that's resigning in protest. That's ethically what we would do. And I thought, man, that's a great idea. That's a good perspective and makes a lot of sense. And it was one of Miss Kim's choices. As I see it, and I'm done, this is my last slide. As I see it, Miss Kim or anyone, any Christian in a situation where we're being ordered by our authorities to do something that we cannot by good faith do, okay, we have three options. We can obey them. In other words, just do away with our conscience and do what they told us to do. We can just do it. A lot of times Christians will do that, and they'll use this authority thing as a good reason why their sin isn't their fault. And they'll say, well, you know, my boss said I had to, or I got to keep my job, or I got to do, and my honest concern there is that we might value the job more than we should, or value the advancement more than we should, and so we end up sinning and using their order as good reason to do it. So she could have obeyed the judge. You and I could obey the judge. Secondly, we could willfully disobey and try to keep the job. Okay? Willfully disobey and continue to hold the office. That is the choice Miss Kim made. I'm not going to do it no matter what you tell me, and I'm still going to keep my job. The third option is that she would resign in protest, resign her office, and say, I can't do this job if this job requires me to do that. Now, I told you at the beginning, I'm not going to judge Miss Kim's choice. I'm not in her life. I'm not there with her. I don't think it would be wise. I can tell you that I believe in good faith that if you as a congregation ask me to do something that I could not in good faith do, then I would have a choice to make. I would have to either obey you and just go, hey, man, they write my checks, you know? Or I would have to try to fight through it and try to win in the long run. Or you would resign in protest and you say, I'm sorry, I can't go forward with this. I'm going to have to step out. That's what you would do. And me personally, I would resign in protest. That's the choice that I would make and would think that it would be the best way to honor those who are above me as my authority, to honor God with my choices and not disobey Him, and at the same time to rely on Him for my preservation and my life and my sustenance and my care. Would you do this with me? Can we close our eyes?